Hey everyone, welcome to week 23 history. And I've got some exciting news for you. We have a guest lecture today. I think some of you might recognize him, but he is going to talk to you today about the Enlightenment. And I'm going to let him take it from here.
Dare to know. These are the words of Immanuel Kant that represent what is known as the Enlightenment. And that's what we're going to focus on today. This is kind of the next part of QC history here. We're going to focus on what is known as the Enlightenment. Yes, Ella?
When did this happen?
The Enlightenment happened between 1685 and 1815. What the Enlightenment really represented was this questioning of the old authorities that existed throughout society. It caused us to think about what governs our world. How is our world actually made up, and what causes things to happen? It's very much so in line with movements like you have been studying, like the Glorious Revolution, where we're removing kind of the divine right of kings and just having this, whatever the authority says, that's what it is, right? It's not this top-down source of knowledge. It's not just whatever the monarch says or whatever your religion says. We are starting to try and actually think about what makes the world move the way it does. It's moving in this knowledge and importance of individual knowledge and of individuals themselves. So we're using reason to try to see how the world works. The musty old ideas they just had to be exposed to the light of reason. And that's where we get the name the Enlightenment from, right? We're trying to shed light into an area where there was just darkness. We didn't know how things had worked. And so we were looking to become enlightened, right? We were taking the old ideas and putting a light on them to see, well, is that actually true? Do things actually work this way? And part of the reason for this is that we are starting to experience a whole lot more wealth in our world. We're just starting to really get more and more wealth. People had started to be able to be explorers, right? Another thing that you can start to learn about in your world history. Right around this time period, we're getting lots of explorers traveling around the world. And people had traveled the world and started to notice that not everybody sets up their society the same way. And not everybody has the same kind of norms. Right? And so people from Europe were traveling over to other parts of the world and realizing that, these people aren't quarreling over these types of things, or they're not fighting over this, or they have different ways of setting up how they interact with one another or setting up their governments, things like that. So we're starting to really see wealth kind of taking off. And this is one of the really important lessons for you guys in studying world history, is to recognize just how much poverty had existed in the world prior to the Industrial Revolution and the 18 and 1900s, when wealth starts to develop. In the world history, the average life expectancy at birth prior to the 1800s was below the age of 30. So when you were born, any time in world history prior to the 1800s, the average life expectancy by most estimates is less than 30 years old. So I am 37 years old, something like that. I don't know. Right now, I would be an old man by those standards, right? And so clearly things have gotten a lot better since then, but we're just at the kind of beginnings of this wealth coming about. People are traveling the world. And so we're trying to figure out, well, how did this happen? We're trying to use reason. We're trying to use the scientific method to understand how these things actually work out. And speaking of the scientific method, that was a big part of the Enlightenment here. We're talking about trying to understand how the physical world actually works. Right? We're no longer going to see the world as like having earthquakes caused by the gods or things like that. We're trying to use science to understand these physical relationships in the world. Why do the stars appear where they appear? We're using astronomy and things like that. And so we get this scientific revolution, and Isaac Newton is often kind of stated as one of the individuals who really kicks off the Enlightenment. And so Isaac Newton, you should go and you should kind of search him and learn more about him. But we're seeing that from Newton, that the universe follows these laws, follow these patterns like gravity, right? And we can explain what is going to happen with these laws or with these patterns, right? Newton also comes up with kind of the mathematics of calculus and showing these mathematical relationships, and that things are going to always kind of appear in these certain relationships to one another, right? And so we're getting this scientific revolution as part of our Enlightenment. And next we have Diderot.
Who's Diderot?
Who's Diderot? Well, Diderot's the first person to write an encyclopedia. He's not so much focused on the scientific knowledge that, say, Isaac Newton was with what's happening with gravity or calculus. He's looking to compile, however, more practical knowledge. And so he puts together the first encyclopedia. He compiles human knowledge with illustrations like the one that I have shown here to show people the knowledge that we have in such a way, often with pictures, that people could understand what it was. They wouldn't have to know how to read and write to be able to use this thing. And we could transmit the knowledge of these things and how to use them and how to create wealth and things like that, right? So this picture shows a machine that was used to create fancy pieces of trim or decorations. And now that it's in the encyclopedia, Diderot's idea was that humans would always have this knowledge then. They would be able to understand how to do these things, and it would be very practical. Now, it's important to understand that Diderot is seen as heretical for putting together an encyclopedia. In fact, some things had to be taken out of the encyclopedia. He was trying to create what he called a dictionary raison, or a rational dictionary. And this was seen as heretical because it was using reason to question the world. It was using reason to question authority, to try to understand, why are things the way that they are? How do things actually work? It was questioning what the world actually is. And so people were very much so opposed to this if you were the authority, if you were the one who previously got to say, this is how the world works, right? Another major emphasis during the Enlightenment is to look at the laws governing the social relationships and society. And that's why I'm here as your guest lecturer. We were questioning, why are things the way that they are, and how do we actually make them better in the social world? How do we set up our society? There's lots of interpretations in the Enlightenment as to which way should we design society. And again, this is building off of some stuff you've just done in your QC lectures, where you see the ideas of John Locke, or you see the ideas of Rousseau, right? How should society be built? What do we make of the human interactions that we see around us? And this is where we turn to one very important interpretation by a Scot named Adam Smith. So Adam Smith and his best friend David Hume were kind of the head of the biggest kind of element of the Enlightenment, known as the Scottish Enlightenment. We got lots of great thought from the Scottish Enlightenment. And Adam Smith, what he argued is he really used reason, he used our logic, thinking about things, to try and understand the limits of our reason. That our reason can only do so much for us. That some societal gains actually happen if we just allow people to be free and stop trying to organize them. Stop trying to use reason to rationally design how people interact with one another and how they exchange with one another, or how the whole society is set up with different classes and things like that, right? Instead of trying to organize everything from above, from monarchs telling us what's happening. So again, this is very much so in line with the idea of the Glorious Revolution in losing or dropping that idea of the divine right of kings. Smith is arguing that it's the people and the decisions of the individuals that are really important, and that sometimes we can actually have better outcomes by individuals finding their way than by somebody really smart understanding and knowing the right way to an answer. Adam Smith's most famous depiction of these ideas is really coming in his work, The Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And here he's talking about how we can have individuals interact in an economy, in creating markets, and in buying and selling of goods, right? And his explanation was one of what he called the division of labor and spontaneous order. And so we're going to try and make sense of everything that I just said about Adam Smith by playing a game for you guys. And you guys can do this at home if you want, but we're gonna play this game, and then I'm gonna try and explain what happened for you guys so that you can see this concept of spontaneous order and this idea of not trying to tell everybody what the outcome actually is, and instead allowing individuals to discover the best ways forward. All right, so here are our contestants. We have Daisy, Mrs. Clark, Addison, and Connor, and they're going to play a little game for you guys. And you guys can actually play this game at home once you see how it goes. But this is called the Alchin Maze, and what we're going to do is we're going to try and showcase some of the concepts we've been talking about. So what we have is we have a setup with a bunch of different cards on the ground. And the goal of our contestants is to get to this side, to get over here to this other side of the maze as many times as they possibly can. Every time that they get over to this side towards where I'm at, they are going to get a piece of popcorn, right? So they're going to get some kind of prize. And so they have to keep track of how many times they make it to the other side. All right, so now that we know the setup of the game, we're going to see how you actually play. So this is what happens is we start at the kind of start line, and Mrs. Clark's going to go first. She's going to go, and she's on this spot here. And on the back of her card, it is a highlighter. It says go. So she's going to be able to keep going. So now she has moved one spot. She's now on this spot right here. And she can go anywhere from this A1 spot here. She can go forward, or she can go diagonal, or she can go sideways. Doesn't really matter. All right. So Addison, you're going to go forward. We're just going to start you right here. What's going to be on your card? Yeah. So she has a go also. So she's still alive in this game. Connor, go ahead, step forward. What does yours say? So show us. So Connor's on the back has an X, which means that Connor is kind of out for right now. So he has to kind of go back behind everybody, and he has to start through the maze all over again. So anytime you run into an X, you kind of hit a bomb and you're out. And then you can start back anywhere that you want in that first row. So he can start anywhere where Mrs. Clark was, to over to here, but the goal is to keep moving one spot at a time and make it all the way across the maze without running into those X's. All right, so we're gonna see how our contestants do here. So you guys can go at your own pace from here on out. One spot at a time, get through as many times as you can.
Yes, I did it.
All right, Connor's through once. Keep going, bud.
I think it was here.
Ooh.
Oh, God. Nah. Just keep going.
All right, Mrs. Clark's through once. Connor's through twice. Ooh. Mrs. Clark got through again. Connor got through again.
Wait, oh no, I forgot.
I know. If you want me to cut in front of you.
Ah!
This one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Okay, we're gonna follow Connor. Hey, you put it back. You don't have to keep thinking it's a card that you absolutely know.
Oh, she doesn't absolutely know. It's like she's telling me that.
Yeah.
Hey, Addie got through. All right, and so they keep on following each other through. They all figured it out. They're all finding the best path through. Good job, contestants. Good job.
Good job.
So in the game, what we saw is there was a lot of errors. So when the players started off, Connor didn't even make it past the first spot without getting kicked out of the game. And then Addie only went a couple of spots and Mrs. Clark only went a couple of spots. And then they got stuff wrong and they were kicked out of the game. But eventually they learned from their mistakes and said, well, don't go on those spots anymore where the X's were because I won't get through the maze. And so they kept trying different ways through. And what happened is they kept on getting these signals that said, not this way, not this way, not this way. And eventually they found their way through. And what happened here was not that anybody figured out the way through ahead of time. No one knew what the best route was in advance. They figured it out by just trial and error, by kind of guessing and checking and getting some feedback, right? Adam Smith is going to argue that this is the idea of spontaneous order, that we can learn the best way forward by individuals just acting and trying to figure out, well, what works and what doesn't work, as opposed to, say, a monarch coming in and saying, our economy will be made of this, this, and this. You over there, you're going to be the blacksmith. You're going to do things this way, right? We're not going to have that kind of a system. And if we do, we're going to be limited by how smart our leader is. And our leader can only be so smart when it comes to our overall economy, right? Instead, what Adam Smith argued is let people be, and they'll find an even better way through the maze or an even better way to create wealth for others. So we have Smith's concept of spontaneous order here. One other example that I have of this for you guys, in addition to the Elchin Maze, is kind of a famous analogy that's somewhat similar to the Elchin Maze here, is this story about sidewalks, right? And so I have a picture here for you guys where that shows a sidewalk. And one sidewalk here is planned. It's kind of from above designed, say by the engineer who created this layout, or in our kind of parallel here, you could say from the monarch, right? Who's designing the layout for this, walkway or whatever it is. And then what you see is a footpath that has emerged spontaneously by people actually using a different route. That different route is what people actually prefer. It's a better path through. But that path hasn't been designed in any way. It has emerged spontaneously. An order has been created by people just using that particular route. And so this analogy really comes from an example of a college campus when there's snow on the ground and plows haven't been able to come through or anything like that. What happens when there's tons of snow on the ground? Well, the first person who has to walk to a building, they have to, create their own path. But then after that, it's easier to walk in the path of someone else's footsteps. So other people follow that path. And you can keep following that path and keep following that path. But if it's not the most direct route, at some point in time, somebody's going to be in a hurry and they're going to create a different route. Even though it's harder to trudge through because there's no footsteps there already, they want to go in a different direction. And what's going to happen is paths will emerge as more and more people use different routes. And we will see what routes will actually be kind of the best routes by how many people have gone there, how much have the footprints kind of plotted things down. And so we get this idea of spontaneous order, this idea that things can happen by, as Adam Smith's contemporary Adam Ferguson said, of human action, but not of human design. No one lays out that path for us, but it does come about, it does emerge, spontaneous order, it does emerge from human action, right? By people acting in those ways. So in an economy, you can think of kind of profit and loss as being this feedback, and that economic production there will be a spontaneous order that creates better economic production. But Adam Smith also talked about this in our everyday lives with norms and conventions and what he called our moral sentiments. So you can think about how we interact with one another as emerging through spontaneous order in terms of the norms that we follow or the conventions that we follow. So for an example for you guys, how much are you allowed to celebrate after you win a game against your brothers and sisters or mom and dad? Can you get really excited and just go, oh yeah, I won, yeah, oh, this is great. and kind of rub it in their face? If you do that, what happens? A lot of people, your parents included, hopefully, and your brothers and sisters will look at you a little funny like, oh my gosh, you're a jerk. That's the same signal as a loss signal in an economy or an X in our Alchin maze. You're getting negative feedback. You're being told, this isn't okay. You can't do these kind of things, right? But when you act appropriately, when you win a game, you're like, yes, that's really great. I'm excited for myself, but hey, you, good game too. That was fun. That's acceptable behavior. And so what we have is your friends will play with you more, your parents will smile upon you, and you will get that positive feedback, like the profit in the system of economics that we had, right? In the profit and loss idea. So our norms can interact this way as well. And Adam Smith talked about that in his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he wrote in 1759. Right? Another example of that, of our interactions emerging spontaneously, is our language. So our language is constantly emerging and evolving, and it happens via a spontaneous order. So I'm guessing that at some point in time, you've said to your parents, hey, let's Google that. Or your parents have said, well, we can just Google that. Google is a verb, but Google actually never really was meant to be a verb. It was a company. And yet that word has emerged as a verb to say, hey, let's look this up on the internet, probably with the website Google, right? No one came out when Google was first announced and said, all right, we're putting this in the dictionary, we're designing our language, and we're saying that we're adding the word Google to our language. Everybody, just so you're aware, we're using Google now to mean look something up on the internet. No one has to design this, and instead, people just kind of casually used it with one another and understood what other people meant. And then it became enough to the point where it actually became an accepted word into how we speak with one another. There was a spontaneous order to our language, and our language is quite complex because of that, and it's always changing, right? And so we can summarize Smith's main contribution to the Enlightenment. These ideas are showcasing that we can use reason to see that we are not reliant on a leader planning everything out and providing the order for our world. The laws governing the social world, how you and I interact, how we exchange goods, how we interact in terms of our norms, right? These things can at times be best served not by the divine rule of kings, but instead by spontaneous order, by an order created by the people. This was not the understanding prior to Smith's time. Smith was certainly challenging the authority with these ideas. He tried to work with them and keep peace within society and not, have a cause for revolution or anything like that. But he was saying, hey, we do want to understand that people are really important here. Individuals are. We're all kind of equal in this. This was Adam Smith's way of daring to know.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our guest speaker today. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for speaking with us. And hopefully you guys learned a lot. I know I did. And I will see you next week for our final week. Bye, guys.